Hello and welcome to the 30th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are moving into the modern era of philosophy. Of course, we are reading A New History of Western Philosophy by Anthony Kenny. So this section we are talking from to Bentham, not Bertram. I was about to say Bertram. I don't think Bertram's a philosopher. Bentham to Nietzsche. Those are the philosophers we will be covering this time. Anything to add on that?
We're in the modern era.
Yes.
We're nearing the end.
Yes, we are.
Was it 2/3 through or 3/4? We 2/3?
3/4.
3/4.
Yeah.
That's 75%.
Mm-hmm.
I just did that in my head.
Congratulations.
Yeah, this is great.
Yes.
So we'll go the way we structure it, or he structures it in his book. He talks about a number of philosophers in each initial chapter, and then goes into the topics and what they cover. So
absolutely.
It was neat to read about these people again that I have not read about in many, many years. And I'm kind of starting to recall what their philosophies and their teaching and their theories are.
And so in the introduction to this section, Anthony Kenny kind of sets up what's going to be going on. And of course,
I just did that. I just said that.
A little bit more in detail, Dad, because we bring back logic in language a lot in this section, which was kind of missing from the early modern era. In the modern era, there's definitely a revival in logic.
Agreed.
And then Kenny also states that he will only cover philosophers' works up until 1975. Because Kenny himself met many of the philosophers in this era and was a close acquaintance of them, and so he did not think it would be, I guess, appropriate to write about them.
It's hard to know who's a great philosopher, at the time that they're living.
Yeah.
Kind of like, what do they say? It's hard to be a prophet in their own hometown.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so starting off with Bentham's utilitarianism.
Yeah, what do you think of this guy?
I think it's very interesting. I think it's very practical, of course, by nature of it being utilitarianism.
I think it's evil.
You think it's
evil? I think it's evil and leads down to misery and despair.
All right. That's a bold statement right off the bat.
Yeah, so why don't you explain what his utilitarianism is?
Yeah, so Jeremy Bentham believed that utility was the test and measure of all virtue and the sole origin of justice. He believed that the standard of morality and the goal of legislation should always be the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So why do you think
if 100 people got happiness from torturing and executing that one guy, guess what's going to happen? That one guy's gone.
Yep, exactly.
Only after Chi-Chi.
It's a terrible joke. Terrible joke.
It keeps coming back, though.
Yeah, it sure
does.
But
I have a huge problem with the utilitarian argument. Or anything that, when you do a math equation about people's value or a person's right to anything, and say, well, we have to do a calculation of what's best for most people. Well, we could do that about anything. We could find that any one of us, because really, if you do the math, any one of us should be eliminated because we're using resources that could be used for a better purpose. Quite frankly, and some of us are more productive than others, but nobody is completely productive and essential that you couldn't eliminate them and distribute their assets to other people and get better benefit from it.
I agree. It reminded me kind of vaguely of, I forget who wrote the Utopia, but with like the elected priests.
Right.
The populace determines what is moral and what is not.
Right.
I think that's kind of what you get here. Just if some people or the majority are happy with one thing, it very greatly disparages the minority.
Yeah, there's no individual rights. There is no value to an individual, except for as it applies to the group.
Yeah.
I mean, you can try to dance around it, but that's ultimately what the philosophy says, utilitarianism.
Yeah. And so Bentham really spent a lot of his time in his early life devoted to laws, basically the legal system,
and reforming it. The English system was especially their treatment of the Irish back then was really pretty bad, and it was so restrictive of who can own what, and that's why so much of the American justice system was different. I mean, they have a rule against perpetuities just because of the land restrictions that were put in place in England. Where you could have essentially a perpetual trust, where if I own this huge land mass, I could keep it restricted till the end of time.
Yeah.
And I forget what the rule against perpetuity. It can only last no longer than 20 years past the last living person mentioned in the estate plan document. And so that's a rule against perpetuity, so it can't be perpetual forever. Mm-hmm. And that's an American development, mainly, I think. Mm-hmm. But that's a law school question for you if you ever go to law school.
All right. Well, thank you.
It's perpetuities.
All right. So one of Bentham's big ideas was the panopticon, which was a circular prison with a central tower so that a single guard could watch all the inmates at all times. And he went around throughout all of England and throughout all of France, basically, trying to put this panopticon into place, but it never was built by anybody. But he did receive some awards for its
They're all
conception.
over the place now.
Really?
Many prisons are designed in this manner in pods. So you have like a pie, where you have at the center of the pie, instead of that little table that keeps the cheese from hitting the top of the box, you have the guard, the guard's area and the secure area, and they have windows looking out on separate pods, maybe 8 different pods, and it reduces the number of staff that you need and improves the ability to monitor them and all that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why he was so inspired by that, but it was a good idea.
It was.
Well, the prisons back then were pretty bad.
Yeah.
And they had debtors' prisons. Mm-hmm. It's another reform of the English system that needed to be done.
Yeah.
And the Irish, I don't think the Irish had any property rights.
Really?
And everything derived from the king. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the problem with the Great Famine, is that they were using Ireland for cash crops that they exported for cash. That's what cash crops.
Yeah.
And the potato was used for the Irish to eat, locally, because it wasn't like a very sought after plant. It wasn't like grains or whatever. And then they had the disease that killed off the potato plants, but they had enough food in Ireland to feed everybody, plus them. But the English landowners who owned the land in Ireland had it harvested and shipped out. And so it's just amazing that they were not able to murder a whole bunch of Englishmen over that, but they didn't. I mean, I'm sure they did over time, but not like an armed insurrection that had any organization. But the British were really good about subjugating people.
Yes. And then with that, I think Bentham saw some of that because he advocated for the abolition of the monarchy and the House of Lords, and he argued for an annual parliament that was elected through universal suffrage, and he also argued for the disestablishment of the Church of England. So really this kind of breakdown of most of the authority structures in England at the time, and completely based on the people, again going back to that whole majority, that utilitarianism.
Yeah, and the annual parliaments is a terrible idea, but the other stuff, maybe not such a bad idea. Having the official church being a government-run deal is not good. Of course, the Church of England now is just a left-wing goofballs.
He also argued for massive education reforms, focusing education on science and technology rather than Greek and Latin. So very much towards just progress rather than looking back at history, focused on, more practical applications as would be expected in utilitarianism.
Well, yeah, and he was right at the time. I mean, they had so much to learn, and just teaching everybody Greek and Latin really wouldn't get the job done.
Yeah, agreed. And then it's kind of... to end off this section on Bentham, Anthony Kenny just kind of goes in and describes him how he was completely unfeeling.
Yeah.
Kind of his own philosophy kind of reflected him as a person, that he had very little understanding of human emotions.
Right.
Was very just calculated and utilitarianist.
Right. And oddly impractical. You'd think a utilitarian would be centered on what's practical and what's not practical, but everything he espoused is really impractical because people's passions. Life is not a math equation, and you end up getting a lot of injustice if you try to treat it that way. I thought it was interesting. Wasn't he a tutor to young
John Stuart
Mill?
Yep, who was
the next person.
The next section, the development of John Stuart Mill.
Brilliant guy, evidently. I didn't know about his personal history.
Yeah. So he was, just very rigorously educated by his father, and he became, as he described himself, a mere reasoning machine. He was basically flooded with information. All the best tutors, all the best information at the time was kind of flooded into this poor child, really, because he had no time to do anything else other than just learn.
Yep. Well, wasn't he the one that was really young when he got through the university program, or
yes,
somebody else?
Yes, that was him.
Like he's like 15 years old or something.
Mm-hmm. Something similar to that. And then he really kind of grew up in a lot of these sort of radical groups. He realized soon on that he believed that there was a need for justification for private property in a free market. He believed that you actually needed to justify that. That shouldn't just be the norm. What is the reasoning behind that?
Right.
Which was, as we'll see later, definitely a more prevailing concept during these times.
Right.
And then he also believed in the perfect equality of men and women. So, absolute on the same page between men and women.
The challenging assumptions. It's kind of funny. That's really not done now. Like especially like I always was. I'm still amazed that people will say, "Well, you can't invade Iran and take out its leadership." As an example, I'm not advocating for that. And I wonder. Nobody says why, other than it's impractical, which I completely get those arguments. But what's the legal justification for the people who rule, or like North Korea, for example?
I think you made the same example at some point in the podcast.
And it's a similar kind of thing. It's like he was looking at this, okay, we have private property. What is the justification? I mean, it is what it is, and it's been that way, and the king says so. But what's the real justification? And I think a lot of people are starting to do that now. It seems like a cycle now. Every 50 years, there's a serious attempt to re-examine private property rights. I mean, the Communist Party was pretty powerful and influential back in the 1930s. So what are we now? Maybe it's not every 100 years in America, because we're coming around to a bunch of Marxists and communists saying, well, we should just take all this money. And it's kind of, and back then, well, I guess they had the tax rates that were pretty confiscatory then too. But when you have now the top, 10% of earners are paying well over 90% of all taxes.
Yeah.
And the people at the bottom are like, it's not fair. So we need to tax the rich. What are you talking about? That's all we tax. We don't tax any of you people. You don't pay any taxes. That's all we're doing is taxing the rich. But yeah, so I think it's valuable to challenge the assumptions and to question them. And then if you think it's a good system, you still have to understand or study why it's a good system. You shouldn't just say, oh, it's just the way it is. Right.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned kind of these cycles of thinking, because that was definitely a thing that John Stuart Mill kind of prescribed to. He believed that there were distinct periods throughout human history: theological, metaphysical, and positive. And so, the theological period, people relied on supernatural explanations for everything. Metaphysical was similar, that they, really used philosophy more than anything, looking at the essence of things rather than pure supernaturalism. And then in this new era, the positive era, everything was devoted to pure reason. And John Stuart Mill, of course, believed that was the best era. But in between each of these eras, there was this period of change and very major conflict. And he believed that he was in that period, that in-between period. And so he really believed that he was in the position to kind of shape things for the future and kind of bring in that positive era.
Yeah, but I don't think he thought it was as a cycle, did he?
Oh, not necessarily
I think he said
a cycle.
It was a process, and he thought it ended.
Yes.
With the reason.
era.
I think there's more of a cycle, because I think we're seeing now people they take for granted the system that's been set up through reason and scientific inquiry, and now we're back to superstition and these kind of these weird religious beliefs of almost like shaman running around. Well, it's like heretic.
Yeah.
They said something that's not. You don't have a rainbow flag because we're in. This is still This June is the month of Pride Month, where all these corporations are really brave. Supporting the Pride movement, because it's really controversial for all these corporations to have pride insignias on everything that they manufacture.
This joke is, you're oppressed when all of the companies realize it is most profitable to act like you for a whole month. So
right. Well, and our embassies have pride flags on them, and oh well and good, I guess.
Yes. And so then he believed, also going back to John Stuart Mill, that really in the past, people believed that, the ideas of arithmetic and geometry were kind of just innate ideas that didn't really need to be proven in a way, that they were just facts and that they kind of came before our own reasoning. Whereas John Stuart Mill said that they are hypotheses. They've just been confirmed very well by our own experiences.
Right.
At some point in the past, somebody had to actually put this into words, into how this worked, reason these things out. Sure, it was a very, very long time ago, and we take it for granted now,
Right.
but those are still hypotheses that have just been very heavily confirmed through our own experiences.
And then you think about like theoretical physics or these weird math theories, which I don't even understand. But like if you have multiple dimensions, how it affects geometry, and because it's not a three planes or whatever. So it could end up being it's all wrong. It's just very close to the truth.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And John Stuart Mill also believed in some very distinct limits on government. I'm going to read this section here on page 763. He says, the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. The only purposes for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant.
Yeah.
It's basically saying the government can only act to take away your free will, only act against you if you are in, imminent danger of hurting other people. They can't just act for your own personal safety. They just have to look out for the rest of the people, essentially. You look confused.
Yeah, I think I agree with the last half of your statement. I don't know that I agree with this first half of it.
What first half? I don't know where the halves start.
I don't know either. That's why I was just kind of thinking it through. I mean,
Yes.
I think you're conflating the government and the individual.
Mm-hmm.
His view is where he says the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. And so I guess in his view of government, there's no real protection for individual rights. It's only to get involved to keep you from harm, but it's not going to protect you and your individual rights unless, I guess, it depends on how you say what harm is.
Yeah.
Harm to others. I'm assuming he's talking about physical harm.
Probably.
But not like libertarian harm type of thing.
Yes.
All right, moving right along.
He also believed that if you are educated, you should have the right to vote, essentially. And that applies to women, too. He kind of says, why should the vote collector, discriminate where the tax collector does not? If you're participating in society, you should still have that right to vote, even if you are a woman.
Of course, he says they should be educated.
Yes.
Which I am a huge proponent of limiting the vote.
Really?
Yeah. I want the vote limited to one, not me. and it doesn't make any logical sense for me to advocate for everybody else to vote. Like if I've known people over the years they'll say, I haven't really read about who the candidates are, but I really need to go vote. No, you don't have to vote. Don't go vote tomorrow. All as far as you know, you're going to vote for the exact wrong people. So don't vote. They're like, why are you telling me not to vote? Because I don't want you to cancel my vote, you dummy. You don't even know what you're doing. It just takes one.
Very fair.
But the way there was, and we used to have much more limited vote. Of course, I'm not advocating for those either. But it's hard to administer it unless it's universal. How do you have an education test? Because then you have to figure out, okay, what's educated? Do you have to pass a test, and then before you know it, it's going to be a woke test. So if you get the answers wrong, in quotes, if you don't answer the proper manner, then I guess you're not going to be able to do it. So what's the standard for education?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I'm going on. I'm
That's
talking too much. You're looking at me like it's moving right along.
No. Two of the big principles to John Stuart Mill were, let me see here, psychological hedonism, where there's that everyone seeks their own happiness, and ethical hedonism, which is that everyone should seek the general happiness. And there was this other guy, Henry Lidgwick, who had a big problem with those two things. He believed that they couldn't really work together. And so he believed that each person has an obligation to seek his own good, and that own good should be intuitively obvious. So it's not something that you actually have to look out and reason for. It's just something that you're kind of innately born with. However, then he kind of realized that there was really no solution to this conflict between your own personal happiness and the general happiness of the population outside of you, because you really can't solve that issue just based on your own experiences, because what is happiness for you is different from the happiness of the general people around you. And it's really very, very hard to find an answer to that if you're just looking at kind of intuition as your basis for what is moral.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that happiness should be a standard for anything?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems so uncertain and not fixed, and too open to interpretation. And what makes me happy today may not make me happy tomorrow or 10 years from now. I mean, you have to have a core. I guess it's not fixed enough of a moral basis for your belief system just to say, well, I'm happy about that. Yeah, I know they mean it in somewhat more
I guess more so fulfillment or joy,
right,
or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess that's really what they're kind of talking about, rather than what we just say is happy, which is laughter, you know, or but it just seems so relative to the circumstances, don't you think?
I agree.
That's it?
I mean, well, yeah, I don't know what else to say. You kind of said exactly what I would think, and that, well, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier. If the majority of people find a lot of happiness in torturing this one person,
right,
if we're just judging on general happiness, then that would be the action we take.
Right.
But, that's not what we should judge our standards on, because I think our own definitions of happiness even change all the time anyway, and I think it's very hard to nail something down that would make any sense for a full philosophical system.
And sometimes doing the right thing makes you unhappy, I would think.
Yeah.
There's some sacrificing that you have to do the right thing. And sometimes you only know that something's right because of how difficult it is. As they say, it's not worth doing unless you have to work for it, or something along those lines. Although I do like that he thought wedlock was simply a form of domestic servitude.
Yes.
And if only that were true.
Jesus. All right. Moving on to Schopenhauer's philosophy of the will. And Schopenhauer believed that the world only exists as an idea in relation to consciousness. And so we can't really prove that the world actually exists. It's really just our idea, how we perceive things in the mind. And with that, he kind of goes into, how do we know how gravity and inertia work? How do those things sort of function within the world? And he believed that the inner nature of all things is will, and that our only immediate knowledge that we have of the world's nature is through the consciousness of our own will. So what the will was to Schopenhauer was that it arises from want, and of course that want comes from deficiency of something, and that deficiency comes from suffering. And so really the driving force between everything in the world is our desire to be away from suffering, because the suffering, again, brings us that deficiency, brings us that want, brings us that will. And so the general nature of the world is just to try to fill its own deficiency of something. And so he applies that as much to like sort of natural phenomena like gravity or inertia, like I just said, as much as to our own personal desires and our own goals of people. So it's a very complex, but also I think overly simplistic way of looking at things, and that everything is just dependent on what you want or what the natural forces of the world want. It's a very strange worldview, I think.
And then he goes on to say, I guess the way to live a moral life or a proper life is to separate yourself from all the worldly goods, so that you can live a life of purity, I guess.
Yeah, he said that there were two ways
to renunciate all that good stuff.
There were two ways to escape from this will, to escape from these primal desires. Yes, art was one of them, which seems strange in comparison to the renunciation.
Yes.
Because renunciation, like you said, is kind of, casting out all those earthly pleasures. But then he also says, in true beauty, we can also remove ourselves from the will, which I don't know how beauty is not kind of an earthly pleasure, how art is not sort of kind of confined there. But he believed that we really should come to asceticism, and that we should have such a horror of this miserable world that we should adopt, complete chastity, poverty, abstinence. We should even welcome death when it comes to us. So really should just not be happy at all in the world.
And I do like how Kenny put in here at the end where he was ends up living a life of luxury at the end of his life, and they asked him about it, and he says, It is a strange demand upon a moralist that he should teach no other virtue than that which he himself possesses. Which is like every politician of the world has thought that. Well, why do I only have to talk about the things that I act out in my daily life as opposed to what I want you all to do? Do as I say, not as I do.
Moving on to ethics and religion and Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard hated Hegel, like Schopenhauer did. That's a pretty common theme, it seems like, in this era of a lot of people just hating Hegel.
Right.
And so Kierkegaard started out kind of atheistic, but he became religious after a certain religious experience. And then he had two different life views for the rest of his life, in two ways that most people kind of live their lives. There was the aesthetic life view, which is that a person who pursues pleasure with taste and elegance, and this person avoids commitment in favor of immediate attraction. And there's the ethical life view, which is someone who, participates in society, makes commitments, but is always unable to fulfill moral law. So with these two life views, he believed that neither of these were, sufficient to bring ourselves to morality. So he believed that there was this other sort of way of living your life that nobody really ever achieves. And that is this religious life view, this religious sphere. You must rely on God completely. And so going into this, he kind of makes the comparison of Abraham to Isaac.
Yeah,
we talked about this before, quite a few episodes ago, in that Abraham broke moral law to fulfill the higher command of God. He took that leap of faith, believing that God, knew what was best, and that what was best was going to be to kill his son Isaac. And so Kierkegaard kind of makes this comparison to all of us as people, and that we kind of have to just rely on complete faith to know that we are making the right decisions, because he even admits that, it's hard to tell if this is a command from God or just our own temptation. But he says we just have to rely on faith. It's a leap of faith in our morality. And either we're right or we're wrong. And we'll find out when we die, I guess.
Yes.
Which is a very brutal and not practical at all way of looking at things.
Right. Oddly, he's not a religious guy, though.
Mm-hmm. Yes. He's religious, but he's not tied to a
denomination.
Faith. Yes.
Yeah. And then they gave him a church funeral anyway.
Yeah.
Take that.
Yes.
Heathen.
Yeah, so he's very, very much disliked the actual functioning of the church.
I guess of the Danish church. What would the Danish church be at the time? Do you know?
They would be Protestant, probably.
Well, yeah, they would be Protestant, but I'm trying to think which denomination.
I don't know. Moving on to dialectical materialism. Karl Marx.
Yes, the wonderful, very influential Karl Marx. Very ignorant, 18-year-old disenchanted wealthy kid in college. Loves him some Karl Marx.
Yes. Karl Marx believed that each stage of history was determined by its predecessor. He also believed that religion was a form of false consciousness, and that the state was an alienation of man's true nature, and that social upheaval was needed to rectify all of the issues in our society. And of course, he worked with Friedrich Engels to work out communism, which was the abolition of private property in favor of communal ownership. And so, like I mentioned, he believed that this in these stages of history, and that was within this materialist conception of history, and that life determines consciousness, and that the modes of production give rise to social classes and warfare between them, and that progress towards the proletarian revolution and communism should be our end goal, and casting out these social classes that are completely based on materials and capitalism, essentially.
Yeah. I'm just surprised that there's so many people that don't see this for the hogwash it is, that you just treat people as categories, and it's these classes, this class struggle, and the idea that that the person who is, well, especially in a more modern American capitalist society, this is regulated capitalism, more so than England at the time, but that they think this would work. That everybody's just going to share everything, or everybody's going to have a share of everything.
Well, he had a process to that, of course.
Yeah.
In that there should be first a dictatorship to instill a socialist state in which, that first step is seizing the means of production.
Correct.
And kind of getting rid of those social classes first under a dictatorship. And then eventually the people under that dictatorship would eventually kind of come to the ability to govern themselves, in which their own ideals align with the ideals of everybody else, and they can achieve that, kind of heavenly communism that he kind of makes it sound as kind of, pure and good in every way, and that our ideals align with everybody else's, and we can freely share everything together as communists.
Right. But I mean, I just marvel that anybody thinks that will ever happen. The first phase is relatively easy. I mean, meaning that you got to kill a lot of people. I mean, and it has happened where you take a capitalist society and you have a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Okay, that happens. And has happened, especially in modern history. And then you have a socialist state where the means of production are taken. But then that never will transfer then to this commune where we're all living in peace, love, and happiness. Because there's zero reason for the people that are in charge to share it. I mean, I don't understand. Do you understand how people can even think that would ever happen?
No, and I forget who said it, but I saw somewhere that, like, even if you are, pure of heart and you're this amazing person and you assume this position of this dictatorship of this socialist community and you have these big ideals and you want to change everything for the better, there's always somebody waiting right behind you to shoot you in the back and take your place because, that's the ultimate power in that dictatorship, is to control everything masked under these good ideals.
Yeah, behind every mass murderer Lenin is even greater mass murderer Stalin.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always somebody worse or better, but they're all bad.
Yeah.
And that's again why I think George Washington was such a special person, because he could have seized a lot of power and he just walked away and went back to the farm, which is just unheard of. But he would have had a hard time of it because they had a government set up with the checks and balances and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't understand the draw to this. I never have. I mean, I tried to read. What is it, Das Kapital or
Das
whatever?
Kapital.
Yeah, when I was an undergrad, I just can't even read it. It's just, I mean, it was an English translation, of course, but or maybe was it? Did he write in English or did he write it in German?
I think it was German. Well, Das Kapital.
Yeah,
German.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I don't think I got anywhere near. I did read Mein Kampf.
Yes.
Kind of boring.
Really?
Kind of boring. I have forced myself through it. Because I want to be able to say I read it.
Why did you want to be able to say that you read it?
I don't know, because it's a bad book, I guess.
Okay.
Kind of like a book you shouldn't read or something. But it was just kind of like meanderings. Or whatever. I don't even remember anything of it now.
Yeah.
I just remember the experience was painful just to get through it. And basically, the reason why I was going to read Marx was to read that too, to see what it's bad. I had a philosophy professor who taught the history of Western philosophy in another course I took. Can't remember his name. Really good teacher. Old guy then. That was in the 80s. And he had. Did I tell this story already?
I don't think so.
He had a kind of like a hobby of studying a philosopher that was the basis for the Third Reich. Very influential philosopher, and I'm completely wrong, but I thought the name was Spencer. But anyway, there's a guy who had like the theory about the superiority of the race and all that kind of stuff, and so he bought and studied everything this guy wrote, and he had it on his bookshelf with a bunch of other books. And he had a friend of his over for dinner, and his friend, was well read and a philosopher as well, and he was aghast that he had all these books by this crazy Nazi philosopher or thinker. And my response, when he's telling us this story, my response was that in order to be prepared to defend your beliefs, you better study the beliefs of your opponent more. Yeah. You need to know their arguments better than your own, or else you don't know enough about your own beliefs and why you believe them.
Kind of reminds me of going back to Karl Marx. There's a good quote that, people who read the Communist Manifesto are communists. People who understand the Communist Manifesto are capitalists.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's really kind of understanding what actually would happen in these systems kind of makes you realize the terribleness
I guess
of them.
I guess it sounds good, especially if you're not doing well in life. It sounds good because you're pissed, you're making, crummy money and you're working hard. You don't feel like you're getting anywhere. And that guy who's running the shop doesn't really work that as much as you, and they're just making money off your hard work. You know, I guess I get the emotional appeal, but when you get off that level and you're talking about theoretical economics or even political philosophy or anything, it's just so pie in the sky, wish casting.
Yeah.
You know, that, okay, we're going to have this dictatorship, and then some, missing step 4, step 5, happiness.
Yeah.
You know, okay, we're missing an ingredient. I don't know how we get from there to there, but all right, I've ranted enough about Karl Marx.
So, I mean, Anthony Kenny even says that he's been completely discredited in every way. Every time this has been tried, it's only been achieved through tyranny, and it's always collapsed eventually. And just through the killing of millions of people, that's how it's instated and kept in order. But it always crumbles.
Well, and you'll hear this from people who still support Marxist theory, is that, well, it hasn't really been tried yet. They haven't done it the right way. Those weren't real communists, or those weren't real socialists, or those weren't real whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know where those real people are, but I am a real socialist. Now I'll get us to the utopia.
Yep.
Okay.
No, it goes back to that same thing. Even if you are the real socialist and you assume that power, there's somebody waiting to shoot you in the back and take it from you.
Well, I think even more to the point is, anybody who wants to go through that process and to force this process forward is already a bad person.
Yes.
I'm going to take all this stuff and I'm going to distribute it to the masses, because it's also so insulting to the vast majority of people.
I know better. I know how to.
We know better to do all this stuff, and you're just dumb, poor people being taken advantage of, and you haven't realized it yet. So working fools. And I alone have the wisdom to know that you're being exploited. Meanwhile, the guy who's working on the assembly line, who's making a decent wage and supporting his family and going to church, what the hell are you talking about, man? I mean, it's not great, but it's all right.
Yeah,
exactly. I want you to shut this plant down and have the government take it over.
Yeah, it is also worth noting that Karl Marx lived in poverty for most of his
by choice.
By choice.
By choice. Yes, because he didn't work while he was writing all this stuff.
He spent 8 hours or 10 hours a day just reading.
Yeah, reading and writing and all this other nonsense, instead of supporting his family, and 3 of his kids starved to death. Literally starved to death. What a horrible, horrible person.
Yes.
And I hope and pray that there is a God, and he is a vengeful God. and that he is a judgmental God.
Okay.
And that Karl Marx is, in a physical realm, suffering endless pain now.
Right.
There are millions of people, literally millions of people, that died because of this man.
Yeah.
And what he has brought onto this world. And the first 3 victims are his own 3 kids. That evil, horrible person. Yeah. He might be... Well, he's certainly the worst person that we read about in this book.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
By far. Anyway, all right, I got enough on that. Rant too much.
Moving on to Darwin and natural selection. It's kind of funny that you mentioned how Marx was so hard to read, because Karl Marx sent a copy of, I forget which one it was, but one of his works to Darwin, and Darwin's like, oh yeah, it's great. It's very well written. He only made it through like the first few pages, which is very funny to me. But of course, most people are familiar with Darwin and natural selection at this point. It's taught in every high school or grade school biology class, because of course he published The Origin of Species, which detailed natural selection, and those kind of 3 fundamental bases to this theory, in that organisms vary greatly in degree to which they are adapted to the environment, and that species are capable of reproducing at a rate that increases their numbers each generation, and that also in each generation only a few offspring survive to breed. So kind of, if you have the most beneficial traits to help you adapt to your environment, then you are more likely to survive, and therefore more likely to produce offspring with those same traits that you do.
When I was reading this, I was wondering, why is this in the philosophy chapter? I didn't think Darwin had but then had like an overarching philosophical view of the world. And then we get to the end of that section. He's like, we just kind of included this because his theories became important for other metaphysics theories. Oh, okay. Well, I already knew about Darwin. Let me just skip that. Because he's not really. He's the most ill-fitting part of this book
I
was
agree.
a section on Darwin. I'm like, okay, well, you could just mention Darwin's, theories or affect their influence to other people, and you could just reference that. I don't know, but
No, but he's in here. There's Darwin, natural
Yeah.
selection, in case you're
Okay.
interested.
it's in the book.
Yes.
We're
Moving on
being true to our summary.
Yes. John Henry Newman. Interestingly
Newman.
enough, a very God Seinfeld reference. Thank you, Dad. He was a very religious person, and he's kind of unique in that he accepted Darwinism very, very early on
Right.
compared to the other religious people.
Yeah.
He believed, he kind of drew on other, things in the world. He said, if we believe that God created each individual animal as it is right now, then we also have to believe that for some reason God created rocks with fossils in them or
Right.
trees that
Right.
were fully grown. And it's kind of like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Of course
Yep.
we should accept, this belief in natural selection. And so he eventually became a Roman Catholic priest. He was within the Church of England, I believe, and then later joined Roman Catholicism.
Right.
He really greatly influenced a lot of the theory of education, and I'm assuming that's kind of the reason why there are Newman Centers on most college campuses
I didn't even
now.
make that connection.
Yes.
I'm stupid to have not even drawn that connection. But
Yes.
yeah, that's the same guy.
Yes, of
That's
course
right.
it is.
Yeah.
So he also, very much worth noting, because this is something that I agree with, he did not share the enthusiasm for papal infallibility that was really prevalent in the Roman Catholic Church at this time, and that, well, throughout really all of its history, in that the Pope is infallible. What he says is true, and it has to be true because
Well,
he's
it's
the Pope.
not always
Not
what
always.
he says. It's not. If he says his dinner's gonna be at 6, and it says it turns out
Well,
it's
yes.
6:30, it's supposed to be the official church teaching as relayed by the Pope. So,
Yes,
but I also don't agree with it.
yes.
But
What he says, ex
People
pontificus, I think,
yeah,
from the chair.
yes,
as
from the
Pope.
chair. That's right. So anyway, I just want to make that point because
Yes.
so many people think, well, everything the Pope says is infallible. No, it's not
No.
what the church is teaching us.
But yes, but
Right.
I do believe that is a stupid thing to say. Do you,
that the official church teaching of the Pope from the chair is infallible is a stupid teaching.
I do believe that. Because it's not even that it is, because he can say, if he really wants to, whatever he wants, ex pontificus, and that can be the official church teaching. He just doesn't do that very often. But I think, looking back in history at all these awful, terrible popes,
Yes.
and especially, with a lot of their things in the past, especially with the Catholic Church,
Right.
even the official teachings have been terrible. And I think
Right.
investing so much, power in one person is just never a good idea.
I agree. You've
Yes.
convinced me.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
No, that's well reasoned.
Yes. And then John Henry Newman, also kind of set up for why it's rational to have a faith, to be, in a religious belief system. Because he believed that we already hold beliefs kind of the world around us without, 100% proof that we see ourselves. He kind of says, well, we know that, England or the United, or Britain.
England,
I guess,
England
Yes.
is an island.
Well, yes,
Right.
England is an island, but none of us have ever walked the entire length of its coasts
Right.
to confirm that it's an island. We just accept that. You can kind of draw that onto bigger things in science, like you were saying, with the things that you don't understand
I
about.
didn't understand everything. What are you talking about?
Well, like within science, with the other theories and things, we
Right.
can kind of believe that those might be true without having the complete evidence ourselves.
Right.
And it
Right.
kind of draws that, kind of in relation to faith, in that, of course we don't have all of the answers ourselves. We don't
Yeah.
know for a fact a lot of these things, but it's not stupid to have faith in
Yeah.
the same way that it's not stupid to believe in the theories of, the prevailing scientists.
Right. I find that's pretty persuasive.
Yeah, I agree.
On a like almost, I guess, just an emotional level, but it's
Mhm.
also intellectual because it's just like there's a lot of common sense there.
Yeah.
I like that.
Hmm.
Makes me feel better about having faith.
I'm glad.
Well, because it's so easy to intellectually just question everything,
Mhm.
and then you're at best you end up an agnostic,
Yeah.
and it's so easy to go down that path.
Hmm.
And so it's nice to see somebody saying, you know what, it makes a lot of sense to have a little faith because you have faith in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like I have faith that my grill is going to work later.
Hmm.
I don't really know how that damn thing works. I mean, I turn the gas on, but I don't really know how gas works.
Yeah.
I mean, and on a very real level, I don't know why it burns.
Hmm. You look like you just had like an existential crisis about how your grill
I
works.
should probably know that a little bit more. But really, how do we? I don't even know how things burn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I understand them. I'm not like completely
Yeah.
stupid, but
You're not just amazed by fire every time you see fire.
well, I am a little bit. but it's kind of funny how. I mean, I don't want to go, but it's kind of funny that this gas in this tank, when I let it go and there's a spark, that it produces a light and heat. I don't really I don't know how. I could not explain to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you really ask me, well, why does it do that?
Yeah.
I don't know that I can answer that.
Mm-hmm. You just know that it does.
Right.
And it will. And it
I'm sure I could find the answer,
Mm-hmm.
but really I'm just going on faith that somebody knows it.
Yeah.
And they wrote it down somewhere. I could look it up on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm kind of depressed about it. Now I got to start studying fire. But,
That'll be the next episode.
I don't-
You'll just be
I don't-
talking about fire.
Well, I don't know it any better than the cavemen.
Mm-hmm.
You know I don't know it.
Yeah, I mean, you know that you need fuel. You know that you need
Yeah.
a source for the
They
fire.
knew that.
Yeah. Exactly.
You think we're so sophisticated? They probably knew it better than I did. I would have a hard time starting a fire without like some matches or a lighter. Or I got one of those little fire starter things.
Moving on to Nietzsche. So Nietzsche was a classical philologist, and he became a professor at the age of 24.
What is a philologist?
Study of language.
Oh,
Yeah.
you would know that.
Yes, of course I do.
Yes.
Uh,
You want to be a philologist.
yeah, I guess so. Linguist is what they're called now.
No,
but yeah.
philologist.
Okay.
Can I call you a philologist if you become a linguist?
Sure, I guess. Although philology is really more study of words specifically, I think. Not so much language as a whole, but
I should get you a
It's-
T-shirt that
it's
says,
what-
you say philologist, I say linguist.
I thought you were going to make that joke with Nietzsche here, because you pronounce it Nietzsche.
I do pronounce it
Yes,
Nietzsche.
you do pronounce it Nietzsche.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. We'll do that later.
Okay.
We'll sing it together.
That's not necessary. So Nietzsche believed that art is the supreme task of life. He had some very strange views, I have to say. I hope we get into these a little bit more, because I don't really understand how they all quite relate. Because he really denounced Christian self-denial, altruistic ethics, democratic politics, scientific positivism, and he advocated for the complete freedom of the spirit. So really kind of similar to, I guess, Marx in a way, in that we need to kind of have a whole social upheaval to kind of free ourselves, to get rid of a lot of these values that people nowadays are holding dear, and set up this whole new system, essentially.
I tried to study Nietzsche, too, because I was like, I was trying to go for like these controversial things. I can't make any heads or tails what this guy
Really?
thinks. I mean, maybe I will now as I'm older.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the summaries, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it even made sense. What the hell he's talking about?
So his most famous work is Thus Spake Zarathustra, in which he kind of set up these big three things for humanity. That the first is that men, as they are now, will be superseded by supermen. So eventually this new race of superior people will be in the place of where we are at now. He believed, secondly, in a complete overturning of traditional and Christian moral priorities. And third, he believed in eternal recurrence, in that in infinite time, all that has ever happened happens once again.
Right.
So kind of history just repeats itself forever.
I think he's wrong two out of the three.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one do you think he got right?
You agree in the third one?
No.
No?
No.
You don't agree that, everything that happens will happen again? This is what you were saying earlier.
Everything is not going to happen again.
Well, similar patterns happen again. Like you were saying.
That's not everything happens
Okay,
again.
never mind then.
That's completely not what I've said.
Then
No,
I-
I just think
then I
that
guess
he
you agree.
predicted a complete overturning of traditional and Christian moral priorities.
Oh.
We're living it now.
I thought we were talking what you agree with,
No, I think one of
Those
those
are
three
his
things
predictions.
happened.
Okay.
Yes.
not in what you think should happen.
No, it just did.
Yes.
No, unless I am one of the race of superhuman higher
I don't
people.
think you're a Superman.
I'm not merrier.
No.
Built squarely in body and soul. I don't know.
So you do agree that,
I think our nature. I think that's wrong, and that our nature is unchanging. The nature of man, I don't think, is any different than it was 2,000 years ago.
well, that's something that I've said multiple times. Like when
Yes.
I talk about especially mythology, kind of bring
Yes.
that back into it.
Right.
I go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story we
Please don't
have.
talk about Gilgamesh again.
the oldest story we have, but it's so many values in that story are still so pervasive today, and it was written
What are the
3,000 years
values?
what it means to be human. Why do we die? The importance of friendship, of companionship, and our kind of quest for immortality. How we want to be remembered and how we want to live forever. And I think those are still held to this day.
How do you want to be remembered?
I don't know.
Really?
Well, I figured I'd have a lot of time to think about it. I'm not planning on being remembered anytime soon.
You never know.
Yeah. And then the final thing that Nietzsche kind of set up here is that he believed that there was a strong contrast between aristocratic master morality, so the belief that, nobility and bravery are the most important values, and slave morality or herd morality, which kind of believed in submission or sympathy, humility, benevolence. And so I guess this kind of goes along with his belief that, we should kind of cast out these Christian values, kind of try to become these supermen, I guess, and that we should kind of, forego this humility and the sympathy and that sort of thing and just be noble and brave. I believe that is what he was trying to say there.
I don't know. We'll read some more about him later.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's quite, the clear divide. I think you could be brave while still being humble.
Yes.
I don't think those are necessarily two complete contrasting things. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier. Sometimes, it's not as happy or as fun or as glorifying to do the right thing.
Right.
But sometimes that's just what's necessary. And that's what needs to be done.
That reminds me of the great Norm Macdonald stand-up routine about, heroes.
Oh, Jesus.
Who the true heroes are.
Yes, teachers are the true heroes.
And that the true heroes almost always are like the guys that do something, or women who do something heroic, and they say, well, I'm not a hero. I was just the right place at the right time, or, I didn't do any more than anybody else would in the same situation. And those are the true heroes. That the people that call themselves heroes are always like claiming to be heroes.
Yes.
Like the teacher.
Yes, like the teachers. That's a good.
That rant was so funny. So if you're still listening to this and you've gotten to this point, reward yourself by playing, going to YouTube or Google or whatever, and get Norm Macdonald, the comedian, his rant with a heckler about teachers are heroes. And that is just a brilliant bit of comedy.
Yeah, that's very funny.
And if he is remembered for nothing else, he should be remembered for that.
It's very funny.
The way he comes back to it like four times.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant. I would love to be able to be a comedian. That's my... Whoops, sorry.
It's throwing your book all over the place.
I meant to put it up there and it dropped off. That would be like my ultimate, what do you call it? Midlife crisis type goal. But it's intimidating, and I don't know that I could do it.
I think you could.
I think I could do it, but I don't know if I could do it funny.
That's the issue. You just wouldn't do it well. Yes. You'd sure be up there on a stage.
I could be up there and I could tell jokes. They might not all. It might not be funny.
So that supersedes your desire to be a farmer, or
those were just jokes.
I never on a boat or something.
I mean, I wouldn't mind having some property, but and I joke every once in a while with boys that say I should have been a farmer because I am the least farmer type person in the world. I took philosophy in college and. Oh, I did have working class jobs, but then I joke I should have been a sailor, and then I should have been a soldier. I think sometimes I say. What was the other ridiculous thing I said I should have been?
Maybe a clown. I feel like I remember you saying that you should have been a clown.
Yeah, I probably said that.
Yes.
Yeah, but I was being a comedian.
Yes.
When I said that.
You've already got a stand-up routine going.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, the only one to be laughing is you. No, that's not true. I'll have you and Sam come, and Sam will laugh at me. You will laugh with me, and the rest of the crowd will just be angry.
That'd be amazing. I'd love to see that.
I'll have to put together a routine. They have open mic nights.
Oh, where at?
Yeah, up at Funny Bone. I think Sunday night's the open mic night. And it's fascinating. Like I need to go to the comedy shows more often, but it's all the way up in St. Louis. And they're not that expensive, and I think you might have to be 21, but although maybe you could be 18.
Should I take an open mic spot?
No. Well,
that's where you're going with that.
You can go. No, I was just thinking you should attend comedy shows because they're it's so fascinating. how hard they work at it,
Yeah.
and it's so tough. But the amateurs, they always have opening acts, which are usually local guys, and then they'll maybe have a mid headliner, and then they'll have a headliner. And the guy, one of the local guys that did it last time was really not great.
Oh no!
And he had like half his stuff was pretty good. They made you laugh. The other half is just like, ooh. Well, there was one that was just a horrible. It wasn't even a joke. Well, it reminds me.
Oh no!
The worst joke ever said. I can't remember the punchline he said, but it involved racism and the death of school children. and I mean, the joke was racist.
Okay.
It wasn't a joke about racism.
Okay.
The joke was racist, and it involved the death of school children, and it was such a bad joke. It was in a crowd of people, like a gathering. And there's probably a dozen people, not like a huge crowd, but like a dozen people in this room. We're all laughing, having a good time. And then it kind of stopped it. And he says this joke. and we're expecting a payoff. It starts going sideways because it mentions the race. And then it mentions school kids. And I'm like, man, this thing's going to have a good payoff because he's in crazy man territory. This must be the best joke ever. And then he says the punchline. And I remember silence, just dead silence. Oh. And I laughed because I said, for this person's name, I said, that was not even a joke. That was just wishing bad things on a particular race of kids. And he's like, don't you get it? I said, there's nothing to get, but anyway.
So if you're a comedian, you should not be asking your audience, don't you get it?
But yeah, so anywho, so don't tell those kind of jokes.
And
that's my.
Was not planning on it.
That's my goal. Maybe we can be a 1-2. But there was one thing I was thinking earlier today.
Well, it still reminds me. You still have a joke to write.
For what?
A Greek and Macedonian and a pro-choice person.
Oh yeah, but I can't come with this. Too hard. I can't come up with it. If I could come up with that, I'll get on stage.
Okay.
If I could come up with a Greek and Macedonian and a pro-choice person go into a bar joke.
Yes.
If somebody were to tweet that to me, I will become a comedian.
Yeah, you could follow us on Twitter at capital U, case LMTD, capital O opinions.
There's something there. Although I kind of like if the joke I started to make, which was the comparing the number of deaths.
Okay.
Because it's really the only connection, because the Macedonians. That would have been Alexander the Great was a Macedonian. So he conquered, almost all the known world and killed all these people. And then the pro-choice person was like, oh, yeah, me and my brother are responsible for the murder of tens of millions of babies.
Yes.
I need to have something beyond that.
Yeah.
So it has to go somewhere, and I can't find out what the path leads me.
Well, if you have an answer, you can tweet at us.
Yes.
Of course.
At the made-up name of capital U, whatever you say every time that I can never even think of what the...
Capital U, lowercase L, M, T, D, and then opinions with a capital O. So capital O, lowercase PINIONS. Ulted opinions.
Yes. Anybody makes a good comment or any comment at all, we'll get them a t-shirt.
Yes, which we still have not designed.
That's all right. We're not in any rush. Been doing this for 30 weeks. It's always been commenting on it.
Very true.
We got about 10 weeks to go.
All right. Well, this has been the 30th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
Still looking forward to that joke. It better happen.
Which joke?
You're the joke you have to make up.
I don't know if I can.
Our many listeners are waiting for it.
I've hit a writer's block.
I'm sure you've forgotten about it.
I'll talk to my racist friend.
Yeah, there you go.